Hey guys, this is David. I'm bringing you a video today about the Weber carburetor, a lot of information on it, a lot of problems people are having with it, and then how it compares to the original SU carburetors that come on the Volvo Amazon. Now I've got a Weber, it's a 3236 progressive DGEV, that means it has an electric choke. It's 2-barrel carb, the first is a 32mm, the second is a 36, progressive advance from the first to the second. So that means that both throttle plates don't open in a synchronized format. They're progressive. Okay. So I was reading a lot as to why I'm having an issue with hesitation. The hesitation issue is basically I start the car, I warm it up, the choke is fully open, I take it out for a drive, and it hesitates at low RPM. It sputters a lot until it's fully warmed up, and I'm talking completely, 5 or 6 miles down the road, or maybe 5 or 6 minutes in the driveway. And what's going on is I'm watching my AFRs, my air fuel ratio on my O2 sensor and the wideband gauge, and it's just leaning out real fast as soon as I hit the gas. There's a couple of reasons why I was thinking that. I got the carburetor adjusted at a shop, and it got a little better. So a couple of days ago I made an adjustment on the fuel mixture screw, and I backed it out a little bit to enrich in the mixture, which helped a lot with from a start hesitation, from the get-go. And then just it didn't really do much for in the middle of acceleration. The Weber is a downdraft, so I'm going to talk about some of the ways it compares with the original SU carburetor. HS6 models are the ones that come on the Volvo Amazon. They come on a lot of other British cars, and so there's a lot of forums where people get together. I was on forums all day, and all the good solid information I found I'm going to tell you in this video, because it's very useful, it's very helpful to me, and hopefully it'll be helpful to you. So I've got a whole bunch of things to read here. So I did a little research about the vacuum advance. I wanted to know some of the science behind why we have a vacuum advance, how that works, because this carburetor, to get the most vacuum at the manifold, I have a timing that is set at 25 to 27 degrees advanced at idle. That's a really high timing. That's with the vacuum line connected, if I remember correctly. I'm used to cars being like 12 degrees advanced, like the 240 series, for example. So when I found out that I'm having some hesitation, I thought maybe my vacuum advance needs some attention. The first forum I found was really helpful. It's called ratsun.net. It's basically the Rat Datsuns. The thread was called Tuning a Weber. The most helpful person on there started out with, "I'm not a carb expert by any means. In fact, I'm having issues with mine backfiring when accelerating. But here's some information. The vacuum advance is to help you with emissions when you accelerate from idle or closed throttle. That means you're dumping more fuel in, and it takes longer to burn, so the advance starts the process sooner. So more fuel needs to start sooner." Okay, that's where the 25, 27 degrees comes in for me. The longer burn gives more power, which is what you need and want when accelerating. The vacuum advance tube needs to be connected to the base of the Weber, or any carb for that matter. Running on manifold vacuum basically pulls the diaphragm all the time, therefore eliminating the vacuum advance. Race cars run a lot of initial advance and higher idle RPMs to eliminate the need for a vacuum advance because it's idling right on the edge of the mechanical advance kicking in, which is not practical for daily driving. But if you think about it, you're racing, you're just going to be stomping on it from a get-go. With a vacuum advance, it's very gradual. Let's move on a little bit. The Weber is a bit touchy. I learned that myself. One of the first adjustments you're going to want to make is to close the throttle plate as much as possible. The vacuum advance tube is connected to a small hole just above the throttle plate, and the more transition time there is before the throttle plate goes above the hole, the better. So basically what that is saying is that, let's say this is your hose plugged in, because it took me a while to figure out how to visualize that. Your distributor vacuum advance is there, and as the plate opens, it starts to pull vacuum, the throttle plate. So basically you should have zero vacuum at idle to the distributor. Double check this by having your vacuum gauge hooked up to the advanced tube on the carb. So in his research he came across a very useful site, and I found it too, which basically talks about enriching the mixture at idle to help the throttle response. You basically turn the air mixture screw out 1/8 of a turn, or even a 1/16 if you really want to get specific. Hit the throttle, let it settle, see how it sounds. Take it out for a drive if you want, see if it's a little bit better that way. If it's really bad, you won't even have to take it for a drive. You'll just know right away. You can probably notice after about a half a turn that it'll start to run rough. Typically when you're doing your initial base tuning on a Weber, you're going to have to seat the idle mixture screw lightly and then back it out 1.5 to 2 turns maximum. And somewhere between 1.5 and 2 is where your sweet spot should be. If it's too far in, that means that your jets would be too big, and so you have to basically shut them off more than the manual wants you to. If your screw is too far out, your jets are too small and you have to dump fuel constantly through them to get it to idle. I got lucky with my carburetor. My jets are a good size, 135 primary jet and a 147 secondary jet. I think that means it's 1.35 millimeters opening on the primary, 1.47 on the secondary. I'm going to show you some numbers that came up that other Amazons had later. So my kit was tuned for a Suzuki Samurai, at least that's what the box is advertised for. It's a, it's a 4-cylinder little rock crawler, so it's got torque, not a lot of horsepower. I was very happy that I didn't have to buy jets and rejet the carburetor, which was my initial concern because I had no idea what I was doing. I'm basically just learning all of this as I go along. So by turning that screw counterclockwise, backing it out, that idle mixture screw, I did it about a quarter of a turn, and I noticed a much better improvement. Of course, my AFRs are a little closer to 12.5 versus 13.5, 14 at idle. So it's running richer at idle. So I got most of the hesitation out that way, but it's still there. So what could possibly be wrong? There's so many little parts on this Weber. Let me keep reading. People are saying I am testing the accelerator pump, and the way to do that is you just open the throttle. You should watch it squirt onto the venturi, and then as air is moving through, it atomizes the fuel and it goes into the combustion chambers in an even spread, in theory. So they're saying if your spray is not in the right direction, or if it's missing the venturi on the primary chamber, then you should probably address that issue. You've got the little accelerator jets. Now they go out two ways. The thing that's been scaring a couple of people and why they think their secondary is not working is because the secondaries don't need a squirt from the accelerator pump because they are progressive. So if it opened at the same time as the primary throttle plate, then it would need it. That's a synchronized throttle movement. So because it's progressive, it comes later. So as the secondary plate opens, the fuel gets pulled through with vacuum, not with the accelerator pump. So keep in mind though, if you stab the throttle, going back to vacuum advance, max intake vacuum drops to 0. And you'll get a result that basically your engine chokes out. Now I can do this at a standstill where push all the way down, pedal to the metal, or watch my engine lean out, too much air, the spark goes because the vacuum's at 0, and then it dies. If I'm fully warmed up, I might be able to save itself, but by that point it's almost died. So basically you're just, that transition time for the throttle plate makes the vacuum advance signal really short. So that's why they're saying you need to gradually accelerate. And everyone's saying the same thing. Oh, I've got a dead spot in my carburetor, but if I accelerate gradually, it's fine. It's totes, my goats. So the hesitation's gone at a stop. See? I'm gonna push the gas. Push the gas. That's great. But that's only with the first butterfly. So if I get it full throttle, it chokes out on me. And then I gotta baby it. So full throttle again, watch those AFRs. See how it leans out there? I don't like that, that really bothers me. So if you gradually run the RPMs up, you'll see the vacuum signal is good for a while. You stab it, you'll see a momentary bump on the vacuum gauge, and then nothing. So what you've basically done is eliminated the vacuum signal before the distributor even has time to react. If you have the timing advanced too much, you'll be over advanced with the mechanical advance when it kicks in with vacuum. The burn will start too early and you'll lose power. So you'll know when you reach a good advance point. The B18D wants something like 18 to 25 degrees advanced at idle. I think that's correct. And it's somewhere around there. The shop put it like 27, somewhere around there, because they said that's where I'm getting maximum vacuum. So one thing I need to do tomorrow is check that the vacuum hose goes to the throttle plate on the carburetor, nowhere else, or right above the throttle plate. And I need to make sure that that's getting 0. Now if the throttle plate is adjusted improperly, you're drawing vacuum through, it'll read on the distributor and it'll advance, and that's why sometimes at a start you're getting the wrong ignition timing, and so you're bogging down a little bit until it finally catches itself. So at lower RPM, you need less vacuum advance. The higher RPM, you need more vacuum advance. So that's why a lot of these cars, especially these Ratsons in this article, are running 32 to 38 degrees advanced timing at around 3000 RPM. The reason is fuel always burns at the same rate. Now that's a very important point. It doesn't burn faster when the RPM goes up. So you basically, with more RPMs, you're pouring in more fuel. You need to start the ignition cycle sooner so that it can be fully burned and come out of the tailpipe as pure exhaust gases, not unburnt fuel gases. And so an issue I'm also having is a really heavy gas smell. So you basically will have to start the ignition cycle sooner to get that full power of the explosion that happens just as the piston starts to go back down. Keep in mind too that these carbs are not designed to be on-off. They try to vary the fuel mixture across a broad range of RPM and load conditions. So these cars are basically designed to be daily drivers, not race cars. So going back to the advance issue there, how they changed their advance for race cars, just to be ready off the line. The primary concern is not wide open throttle when you're having a daily driver. 98% of the time, you're not at wide open throttle, let's just face it. So for good daily driving, you're going to have a lot of on-off movements, and the carb is basically mechanical compromise of all of those conditions. Now, if you want perfect fuel distribution, it says switch to a fuel-injected setup with a tunable ECU. I mean, everything I've read about Webers, especially the DGEV, which is an older model, says that it doesn't respond well to throttle getting stabbed. And that's what people are complaining about. They want that power instantly, like we're all used to with our other cars these days. So it prefers a much more controlled transfer to wide open throttle. That's too bad. When the light is green and then it turns yellow and you're like, I gotta go, and you just put it down, you'd be better off downshifting first and then going. Even then, I'll have a little bit of bogging for maybe a half a second or so, which is not acceptable because time is precious when you're trying to cut through a yellow light. Of course, it's safer to stop, but you find yourself in those situations. So I read a little bit about how leaning the mixture burns the fuel slowly. So a lean mixture burns slower than a rich mixture, which is why richening up the idle mixture gives you a better off-idle response. That way you won't be starting from a borderline lean condition and going into a more lean condition. You want to start a little bit rich off the idle so your dip won't be so severe. So basically it's good for me to have richened it up because starting out with a load and then having it lean out immediately because I was kind of borderline lean, that's bad. I mean, when the carb shop did the adjust, they didn't drive it. They got it, they got my fast idle, they adjusted the throttle linkage, and they just made sure the choke was good. And, well, actually I did the choke later. But it was all set. Now, if they did drive it, I probably wouldn't have these issues because they would be able to say, oh, well, I could tell you this and this and this is happening. Or maybe not. Let's continue. One more thing that this man wants to add is that when putting the hex nut on the throttle shaft linkage, I'll put an image here for you, the butterflies and the plate could bend if you over tighten that nut. Now, this is the throttle linkage where you can either attach your little arm with the heim joints or you attach the throttle cable. They have attachments for that too. So, when you put torque on the throttle shaft, you give it a little bit of a more open condition, so that could cause excess loss of vacuum. All right, moving on to a Jeep form. Now, Jeeps also have the 3236 carburetor as a swap option, and this is for their larger engines. You can still increase the jetting, and it'll work for, I think, like the 4.2 engines and things like that. Here's the issue. It says, right now I have a stumble at part throttle just off of the idle. I'm messing with the idle jets to dial in the progressive circuit. I started going bigger with a 65 primary and then a 70 secondary. And then I checked the plugs. They turned out to be very black. So I went back to stock, which was a 60-60. Now I'm about to drop one size, which is 60-55. I'll let you know how it goes. People are saying, hey, leave the idle jets closer to stock and increase the size of your air corrector jets by 2 sizes. Should help draw a little extra fuel when you crack the throttle and increase the vacuum. Thankfully, I could just do the enriching of the mixture and take care of it. I don't really want to bother with the jetting because I just don't care about it that much. I mean, I'm not trying to sound lazy. I want my car to run at its best. But if I don't have to tear it apart, it's good to check the easy things first. So those adjustments will basically send you in the right direction. The next step of advice is to connect the vacuum gauge to the S port, which is where the distributor vacuum advance goes. This will reveal how near or how far away the proper throttle plate setting is. You should see that the idle speed screw setting is no more than 1.5 turn in at maximum. According to the Weber troubleshooting, it says back out the idle speed adjustment screw, which is basically the screw that hits the throttle lever to open and close the throttles. And snap the throttle, pull it open, snap it shut, so make sure that it's completely closed, assuming you have no bends from over tightening that nut. And then you contact the screw with that and you turn it no more than 1 to 1.5 turns. If you have vacuum at the ported vacuum source, the ported source is that where the distributor advance goes right above the throttle plates, that could be 90% of your running rich problems with any Weber. Basically the throttle plates are adjusted improperly. It's important to be on the idle circuit when adjusting the mixture screws. So think about it, your throttle plates are open, you're basically not in the idle circuit and you're making adjustments somewhere else, you could be messing it up even further. So this is a Jeep form. There's not much you can get out of a Jeep form that'll apply to Volvo cars, considering that they're heavier, bigger engines, larger jets, and a total different carburetor setup, even though it's the same 3236 DGEV, DGV. There's also a couple of other variants there. So I went on to the MG Experience website. They have a lot of good information. They talk about how the DGVs are notorious for the float level being set wrong. And I thought if the DGV had that issue, shouldn't the DGEV have that issue? The float, you basically have to pull apart the top half of the carburetor. What I'm thinking that I'm going to try to do is actually just pull apart the top of the carburetor and just clean out all the passages. Clean out the jets, clean out the idle mixture passageway by taking out that screw and taking out the idle mixture jet or whatever it's called. And I can also clean out the accelerator pump and clean out a screen diaphragm. I went to mgexperience.com and I looked at some of the forums about their Weber problems. Found some interesting information. A lot of these older MGs run the same carburetor that the Amazon has, and the B18, I think some B20s, and that is the SU HS4. And so the DGVs are notorious for this. If the float level is set wrong, and I mean keep it within 1/64th of the factory height and drop specifications, that typically fixes it. And they're all wrong by the time they ship to your door. The rattling in the box bends the float tabs. How could that be? Because the emulsion tubes are what draw fuel off idle, and they function by having tiny holes drilled at different heights to suck fuel into the airstream. If the float is too high or too low, you run rich or lean, but only off idle. So that's a DGV. It doesn't really apply to this carburetor. I don't know how different they are, so it's also important to check my float. This is where it finally got interesting. So people are saying, I've done all of these things, I've checked everything, I've adjusted everything, and I'm still getting that dead spot, that hesitation. What am I missing? What am I doing wrong? The manifold. Let's read. This is where I got really excited. Well, I should say disappointed, but also excited. It's not the carb. It is the Pierce manifold that you have to use with the carb. Due to the Siamese port, there is a dead area on idle that causes some of the fuel to drop out of suspension and condensate there. When accelerating, there's a momentary period of running rich, resulting in hesitation. There's no way to completely eliminate the hesitation. I have a Weber on my 77B MGB, and I find that the performance and ease of adjusting outweighs the minor issue of hesitation. I just blip the throttle lightly to clear the manifold before starting out from idle. I have to do the same thing with some of my older 240s too. I do like the Weber when accelerating, and when the secondary barrel kicks in, it's a little bit like having a supercharger. I can't say I've had that much power. Of course, I probably weigh a couple hundred pounds more than an MGB. You know, the Volvo Amazon 4-door weighs 2,500 pounds, which is like the same as a new Prius C, or 300 pounds more than a Miata from the 90s. I don't know what these new Miatas weigh. So the solution with these guys always seems to be advance the ignition more and turn up the idle when you have the jetting spot on, which can be a huge cause of frustration. To me, this screams wrong application. Manifold, carb, or what have you, it just ain't right. So what these guys are saying, stick to the original carburetor that came with the car. That's something that's been echoed in all these other forums I've read. The Jeep forum, now the MG forum, we're about to see in the Volvo forum especially. So what one person did is they bought the synchronizing kit, which opens up both primary and secondary at the same time, the 32 and the 36, and then it comes with a new passage for the accelerator spray to both ventures. So you're basically having two throttles at once. Now, wouldn't that use more gas? It's true. And the guy who did it said, well, I can't really report that much of a loss because I'm always stomping on it. So if you're mashing the throttle all the time, of course you're going to have bad fuel economy. Another option is to use a 3838, and even though it worked okay for this MG, it's just not as responsive as the SUs that they took off because of the manifold. So the only thing holding this guy from changing it back, which is probably I can attest to the same thing, is laziness and the money that it will cost. But how expensive is it to get SU carbs, to tune them, to buy parts for them, and get it running right? Well, we're going to find that out in a few minutes when we get to the Volvo forum. So the Weber downdraft seems to be a good carb for other reasons, but the manifold is basically the weak link here. Now, how different are the MGBs versus the Volvo manifolds? Well, have a look for yourself. People are reporting on MG's website that they're happier with the SU, and so the guys who are stuck with Webers or can't afford SUs or don't want to switch them out, because the car runs. It's just like that one little thing that bothers them. They're thinking, well, is there anything you can do to a downdraft manifold? Is it only the Pierce brand manifold that has the issue? And I think the ultimate issue comes down to it's a downdraft carb in a manifold. It's going to have awful dead zones. You're very limited vertical space to give it a better curve. You know, think about it, the SU carbs are side draft carbs. There you go. On the other hand, air-cooled Volkswagen applications have nearly the same plenum, and they have lots of space to work with because, well, they're very vertical assorted cars. The carburetor's on the very top. We have ours on the side. The MGs also on the side. Advancing the timing is a solution for the DCOE, not the DGEV. All Webers are not created equal. Fix the float level and the carb will run just fine. So if you've got a DGEV, hopefully you're getting something out of that. Another testimonial, I like my 3236. I had the hesitation, but it was a DPO issue, which correcting the timing and adjusting the carb took care of. Pretty good. A lot of people try not to go that route, and they end up going a different route, which is very frustrating because you end up coming back to it in the end, and you wasted more time and money. The car starts every time, it runs smooth at idle, like a well-crouched panther, and it pulls like a train when you step on it. I like that. The heated Weber manifold for some of these DGVs are getting a very good review, and the fact that timing is set up to a point that they thought was very advanced, 25 degrees, happens to be a good spot for them for these MGs because it runs without hesitation. So Weber has indicated in some of their texts that a heated manifold or a heater manifold is required for proper operation. So that's basically a manifold with coolant running through it, I think. There's a brand called Canon. Oh, the reason why a heated manifold is good is because it helps keep the fuel in an atomized state instead of it being cooled down and settling in places and then just being drawn with excess vacuum when you're coming off the line and giving you hesitation issues. So Canon is a brand that makes a manifold for the downdraft Weber, and somebody said that, hey, I got one on my MG, I dynoed it last week with the DGEV 3236, and it has a provision for water heat, and it worked out pretty well. They didn't give numbers, but that's okay. So Weber hesitation, let's just review. Essentially, fuel in the mix is falling out of suspension due to low velocity and temperature differential. It's basically condensing inside the manifold past the carburetor, and once you step on the throttle, all that raw fuel gets sucked into the engine, causing an over-rich stumble. Heating the manifold helps keep the fuel suspended in the air. That might work for the MGs. My carburetor and manifold are sitting right on top of my headers. In fact, they're touching in a spot. It's a very, very tight fit, and it's getting very hot. So I don't think that's what really applies to me. So another forum that was very useful, IHateMud.com. 3236 DGV, DGEV, DFV, and DFEV are carbs with fixed venturis, so the choke size is not really an issue if you're concerned about that. The pump jets are also not a problem, so don't mess with those. If you have a flat spot or hesitation when you first take off, it's likely due to your idle circuit being too lean. That was what cured my issue for the most part. If you know that you have the idle circuit right, then the primary jet is too small. Is my primary jet too small? Increase the main jet 2 sizes at a time. So a 150 main is basically 1.5 millimeter hole. Main jets are in steps of 5. 150, 155, 160. Keep checking the plugs after driving it. Make sure that you don't let it idle in between checking it. So you're doing a full drive. Drive the car above 2,000 or 3,000 RPM for a few minutes. Shut off the engine before letting it idle. Check the plugs. And if the car transitions fine but hesitates or falls on its face when the secondary is opened, it looks like you gotta work on your secondary jet. So recommendation from this website is buy our custom jetting kit and get an air-fuel ratio gauge so you can monitor and help tune your carburetor a little bit more accurately and quickly. Imagine pulling out a spark plug every time you want to change something or just adjust something. That could be a while. I mean, not that it's hard to take a spark plug out, but if you have a gauge, it's awesome. Of course, the real danger, let's just remind ourselves, with leaning out a piston is that you might burn a hole in it. I don't want to do that. My last car had a hole in, the engine in my Amazon before the rebuild had a hole in one of the pistons. It was not good. It was because of a broken ring, but still not good. On to brake board. All right, Volvo guys, this is where you roll up your sleeves and you get excited because this is where it's really good information. Okay, so I told you the size of my jets are 135 and 147. Here's an Amazon wagon. It has a B18 stock exhaust with a 3236 DGEV, the electric choke. Mains are 140, 140. Has a 165/160 air correction for the primary secondary and a 65/50 on the idle. I don't have the air correction or idle numbers for my carburetor, but I can tell you that if it's working to have a 140 on his and I've got a 135, maybe I should get a 140. So Oregon Volvo tuners, you guys are the best. I love you guys. Here's the question. Does anyone have anything to share about their experience converting their B18 to a Weber from SUs? I decided it would probably be the best thing for me. I'm looking for better fuel economy, less maintenance, better off-the-line acceleration, and I think Weber could bring all of these things to me. I liked the SUs at first, but now seeing how much more work and parts I'd need to put into them, filters ranging from $50 to $100 a set, you can get them cheaper, $40 jets and needles, I can't find or identify as correct, and synchronizing them. You have to buy one of those synchronizing vacuum things, or you could just do it if you're a wizard by ear. The photo of the kit for sale on IPD looks like a lot of stuff, but I'm sure that's all stuff to be assembled. One eBayer insists on the manifold needing to be hooked into the heater hoses. I wondered if that's necessary. Once again, if you're sitting on top of the exhaust manifold, it's going to get hot. Don't worry about running your heater through it. All right, here comes one of the smartest guys on this website, Cameron. Once they're dialed, a pair of SUs will last for several years without any real attention. I have a pair that are coming up 15 years use without any repairs, and they're working just fine. This is a year-round daily driver. Now, you have a needle and jet. All you need to know is which needle is best for your configuration, and you're all set. Unless your jets are damaged, you don't need to replace them. With the Weber, get this, you have idle jets, main jets, accelerator pump jets, springs, and discharge valves, potentially. Each of these little pieces interact with each other, so changing the idle jet, for example, will affect the main circuit, and vice versa. Now multiply these interactions by 2, because you've got a primary and a secondary. 2 throats that have to be tuned separately. If you're syncing the SUs and you find that difficult, then you'll never get a Weber dialed in properly. You can probably make the car run and drive, but it certainly won't be tuned right. And maybe that's okay for you. He goes on to say, never mind that the intake runners are unequal lengths, and overlook the 2 90-degree bends that the incoming air has to make before the fuel charge meets the combustion chamber. There is such a thing as too much turbulence. And this isn't talking about long runners. This is talking about straight 90 degrees. The Weber became popular because any new carburetor will almost always work better than any worn carburetor. I wouldn't use one, even if it were free, unless I had absolutely no alternative. If my opinion isn't what you want to hear, check out the brickboard and see what others have to say about them. Signed, Cameron. Cameron drives a 444 and a 122 SC. The 444 is one of my favorite cars right there. And anyone who is keeping one of those on the road basically earned my respect. Somebody, just to clarify that turbulence doesn't have to do with the intake runner lengths, because a lot of manifolds on newer cars make some crazy turns and everything, but they're never at 90-degree corners like they are with the Weber. So think about it. You've got your filter, air straight down into a downdraft carburetor that then takes an immediate turn into the engine. That's just too many turns. Longer runners are better than shorter runners, but having the air make those 90-degree turns before it gets to the engine versus 1 or 2 soft bends will certainly make a difference. This isn't to say that a downdraft carb can't be tuned or optimized for your 4-cylinder. It's just that it'll be fundamentally more difficult to get it dialed in, and that you'll still be faced with greater turbulence than the SUs or a similar side draft carburetor. Now, I've heard both arguments on either side. Unequal length runners on the intake manifold makes it impossible for all cylinders to match. 1 and 4 are longer. This is good for flow, but there's also more surface area for the fuel to fall out of suspension and condense. Blobs of gas surrounded by air just don't burn the same like atomized gas. Essentially, you want the fuel charge, like Cameron, to follow a similar path into each combustion chamber rather than 2 sort of straight short paths and then kind of 2 curved round paths. Now, I know it's kind of picky for daily drivers, but you will probably notice a little bit of a difference in responsiveness. It's not going to be an issue on old Volvo engines, at least most of them, because he very well puts that no matter what you do to them, they're still tractor engines that you use push rods and have the intake and exhaust valves on the same side of the head. They can certainly be made to run well, very well even, but given the other limitations, tuning out intake charge turbulence is one of the very last things anyone would want to bother with in their quest for power. Old cars are fun, aren't they? Signed, Cameron. Brings up a very good point. Now, my first mistake was bragging about how I sold the worn out SUs on my 122, bought a Weber, and still came out with a couple of bucks in my pocket because SUs are selling for more. And now I realize why that is, because they are ultimately the carburetor designed for this application because the Weber manifold doesn't really work for this engine. The carburetor is great, sure, it's a Weber, and people all over the place are complaining about hesitation issues, the Weber dead spot, the Weber hesitation, and it's got a reputation for it. And the SUs are expensive. Sure, it'll cost you like $150 to have a shop repair them. You could probably sell your Weber and buy the SUs if you're driving a 122 and you've done the swap and you want to go back like I did, and end up paying probably around $50 out of pocket, and then having to pay for the rebuild kit, the labor, finding a shop that'll do it, and then trying to either synchronize them yourself. IPD sells a little synchro gauge that just measures the air velocity going in. A little tip for the SUs, this is going off on a tangent, but you can also put in SAE 30 instead of ATF. It's a little thicker, a little heavier, and so what it's going to do is slow down the upward travel of the piston, essentially giving you faster air velocity at those higher RPMs, a simulation of more power. It'll hurt your fuel economy, and it's also a negligible amount of power difference. Now that's all very specific stuff about the SUs. So what I've decided is better rich than sorry when you're running a carburetor like the Weber. So that's why I'm running at a richer idle, because I don't want to burn a hole in my piston, I don't want to destroy my plugs or anything, or my valves. And I'm keeping an eagle's eye on that air-fuel ratio, because if anything happens and I cause engine damage because of the Weber decision, I'll just be really upset about that. And the second point I'm going to make is that I'm going to just basically save up and switch to SUs again. So it's a long-winded answer, but I did some good research. Hopefully this helps you too. And if you have any questions, or if you want to add anything to it, or if I said something that was incorrect, because a lot of forums are opinions, but these are people's experiences too, which is I find very helpful. Or I could just go to the Weber website or the Weber books and just read about things and then not really comprehend it the same way. I've got a couple of tests to do, make sure that everything's in line with my carburetor, but apparently even a perfectly tuned Weber isn't going to be as responsive as an SU, and I know that statement's going to get a lot of contention, and I welcome it. So please, if you want to add something, feel free. In the meantime, I've got daily videos. I'm going to be tinkering with the Weber a little more in the next couple of days, so make sure you keep checking in. Subscribe if you haven't, and you'll get those updates and alerts every time there's a new video. Hopefully you'll learn something new. Hopefully I will learn something new. And with that, I bid you a good night. Thank you for watching.